Thank you, everyone. Great job with the special music today. It was really cool. And thank you, Charles, for all your help, and Aaron. Good morning again. Good morning. How many of you have ever or remember the show, the A-Team? Anybody? Obviously, I watched it when I was very little on reruns, right? But the whole premise of the A-Team was this group of guys. They would travel around, and they would find people that needed help, and they would come up with these ridiculous plans, right? These crazy plans, and then every week, somehow, with a little bit of skill and some fortune, they would pull it off, right? So they would always pull their plans off. And Hannibal, the leader, if you remember, at the end of the show, he'd have a cigar, and he'd say, "I love it when a plan comes together," right? But it was really a lot of luck and just fortune that their plans came together. See, a lot of times in our lives, we make plans, or we're a part of plans. Have you ever been a part of someone else's plan, and you're like, "I'm not sure if this is a good plan," but I'm going to go along with it. I think Rebecca probably thinks a lot about that with me, right? I've got a good plan for us. Or if you've made a plan yourself and you've thought, "I think this is going to turn out well," you know, and we come up with these plans, and sometimes I think God's like, "Your plans aren't that great," right? We always think our plans are really, really good, but they're not always wonderful. And part of being a disciple is learning how to trust God and His plans above our plans that we think are amazing, even when His plans don't seem necessarily to make sense to us all the time. That's part of being a disciple and learning to trust God. We read, we reread, we meditate on Scripture so that we learn who God is, we learn His consistency, how much He loves us, how much more, right, He knows than we know, and His perspective is so much greater. And so when He says, "Here's the plan," even when we don't necessarily understand it, we can trust it. And we spend a lifetime learning how to do that well. It reminds me of Jericho. If you guys remember the account of Jericho and Joshua, you have the second generation of Israelites that were raised in the wilderness, and they're finally going to the promised land, and they come to the city of Jericho that's fortified, and God said, and you can imagine Joshua like gathering together like his military strategists and all the people, and they're like, "Okay, God, what's the plan? What's the plan for Jericho?" And God's like, "Okay, let me tell you. First of all, you're going to walk around it for 6 days. One time a day for 6 days." Right? You can imagine the military strategists were probably like, "That seems odd." Right? It's not the best military plan. They probably wanted to like sneak in through a water shaft and take out the guards and stuff. But God's like, "Okay, you're going to walk around it once a day for 6 days. Maybe that could be for some intimidation factor. I don't know. The military people were probably confused. But on the seventh day, we're going to switch it up." And they're probably excited to hear what they're going to do on the seventh day. And on the seventh day, you're going to walk around it 7 times. And then you're going to blow some trumpets. And then that's it. That's the plan, right? Again, from a military strategy perspective, that's a horrible plan, right? What does it even accomplish? But guess what? They do that, and they win. They win, right? Because this is God's plan. Like He told them, I've got it under control. I just want you to do this thing that seems very like it will fail, right? If God's not working, and they follow, and they do, right? So they have high trust for this plan that seems out of place in a military way, but they go through with it. And that's what we're trying to do in our lives, is to learn how to truly trust God with the plans that He has for us. So today, as we find ourselves continuing through the Gospel of Mark, and we're coming close to the end. Mark's going to be landing the plane here soon. We're in the second half of the book, if you remember. In the second half of Mark, it's all about what the purpose is of Jesus coming. The first half was Mark taking us quickly through almost 3 years of Jesus' ministry. As Jesus went here and here and here, and he did these, he wants us to see what he did and what he said and how people responded. And that all led up to 8 when we get the question, who do you say that Jesus is? And you're forced to, as even a reader, to seriously think, okay, who is this person and what do I want to believe in him? Mark is trying to get you, the reader, to believe what he believes, that Jesus is the Messiah, the Savior of the world. And so in the second half, he's saying, okay, what's the point? Why is he here? What's the purpose? What's the plan that God has set for us and for him as we're moving closer and closer to the end of Jesus' life, humanly speaking, and the resurrection coming soon? Well, today we're going to look at the plan. And there's 3 sections for today. If you want to join me and turn to chapter 10 in Mark, the first section is 32 through 34. And this is the plan for Jesus. The plan for Jesus. Let me follow along as I read here. And they were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them. And they were amazed, and those who followed were afraid. And taking the 12 again, he began to tell them what was to happen to him, saying, "See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and to the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him over to the Gentiles. And they will mock him and spit on him and flog him and kill him. And after 3 days, he will rise from the dead." So here we have, like, the scene right before here that we looked at last week was with the rich young ruler and that question, what do I need to do to gain a relationship with God? And Jesus pretty much saying that's like, you're missing the whole point. You can't. It's impossible. It's what I'm going to do that's going to bring you into a relationship with God. Only God can do it, and only with God is it possible. And so after that, as Jesus is continuing to move forward, the people are following him. And again, these reactions Mark wants us to notice because he talks about them over and over again. Some people are amazed, right? They're astonished. They're astounded. They're like, who does the things that he does? Like, where is this leading and where are we going, right? This is going to lead to next week when we talk about his triumphal entry and that you'll be reading about this week that we celebrate today on Palm Sunday. Some people are afraid. There's fear and reverence, and even again, who is this guy? Like, what's he here for? What's going to happen? What can he really accomplish and do? So what he does is he gathers his 12 together, his closest disciples, and he begins to tell them the plan. And this is actually the 3rd time in the book of Mark that Mark is telling us that Jesus is pretty clear with the plan that's going to happen once he gets to Jerusalem. But again, as they're approaching now closer and closer, Jesus is going to reiterate this to his closest disciples. And again, just kind of like in the Jericho situation, you can imagine with me, Jesus huddling his guys up together and maybe saying something like, "Hey guys, we've been together about 3 years now, right?" And they're like, "Yeah, Jesus, we've been together." And Jesus being like, "Okay, we're going to go to Jerusalem." And they're like, "Yeah, Jerusalem, that's where all the action is. We're going to go to Jerusalem, and you're going to take over, and it's going to be awesome." And Jesus is like, "Okay, once we get there, this is what's going to happen. The religious leaders are going to take me. They're going to give me to the Gentiles who are going to mock me, and then they're going to kill me." Right? You can imagine his followers being like, "What? Like, that's the plan?" He's like, "Yeah, that's the plan. But guess what? I'll rise from the dead in 3 days." So that's the plan, right? So you can imagine maybe like how they're feeling at this point, right? Like all these years, all the anticipation, and even him after this, again, in 8, 9, and 10 chapters, and the chapters in Mark has given us times where Jesus has tried to communicate this to his disciples. And one of the beautiful things about these Gospels are that we really see that they didn't quite understand what was happening, right? They really didn't get it until after the fact, after they saw the resurrected Jesus. And then when they reflected and we went back and started writing their accounts down, they were brutally honest with the fact that they weren't quite there. They didn't quite get what Jesus was trying to say. Even though it seems pretty clear here in this passage that he says, we're going to go there, I'm going to be handed over, and I'm going to be killed, but then I'll rise again, right? He's trying to be very clear with them. But, how do you How can you comprehend the fact that somebody's going to rise from the dead when it hasn't happened before, right? But even though Peter did say, acknowledge that he was the Messiah, it's still difficult to see. But one of the biggest proofs, of the resurrection is the fact that these guys who didn't get it after the fact changed their whole lives. They changed their whole lives. There's actually a Babylon Bee video. How many of you are familiar with Babylon Bee? Okay, if you aren't, it's like a satire website. And there's a video on there of the disciples, and they're hanging out after the crucifixion. And Peter stands up. He's like, guys, I've got a plan. And they're all like, what's the plan, Peter? Because they're pretty down, and they want some good news. And Peter goes, we're gonna go and remove the guards from the tomb, roll the stone away, and steal the body. And then we're gonna tell everybody that Jesus rose from the dead. And they're like, yeah, that's a great plan. Let's do it. And then he goes, and then John stands up. He goes, then what's going to happen? And then Peter goes, then we're all going to be brutally murdered. And they're like, oh. John's like, wait a second. What about like fame or riches or things like that? And he's like, no, we're just all going to be killed for saying that. It's like this. It's just like a satire to say, why would they make something up and then just die for that, be persecuted and eventually all killed for it. Especially when they didn't quite understand it when it was happening, and then something happened that we'll talk about next week when it's Easter with the resurrection that changed what they believed. It changed their life. It changed everything, and it forced them to live life differently to the point where they start the church and suffer persecution and ultimately all die for it. So Jesus says, this is the plan. Be handed over and be crucified and rise from the dead. And just like sometimes we have plans that may not make much sense, they're sitting there being like, I'm not sure if this doesn't sound like a great plan. But again, God's plans are always much better than our plans. And as his disciples, we learn to trust God's plans when we don't quite understand what's going to happen. And that's where the disciples are here. So the second section is the plan for the disciples. This is 35 through 41, if you want to follow along. It says, and James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to him and said to him, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. And he said to them, what do you want me to do for you? And they said to him, grant us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory. Jesus said to them, you do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized? And they said to him, we are able. And Jesus said to them, the cup that I drink you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but is for those for whom it has been prepared. And when the 10 heard it, they began to be indignant at James and John. You got to think a little bit about how Mark is putting these things together, right? He's not giving us every detail of everything that's happening. So when he puts accounts together like this, you ask yourself why. Like, why is he putting this right after this account of Jesus being very clear with his plan? So right after this very clear announcement of what's going to happen, and really the sacrifice and all that goes into that, he wants to highlight this account of James and John coming up to Jesus and saying, hey, Jesus, can we ask you something? And can you grant it for us? And Jesus is like, sure. What do you want? And like, yeah, when you go to your glory, so when you rise to power, because in their mind they're thinking power, like authority over the kingdom, that Jesus is going to maybe take over Rome at this point. Can we also have power too? And not only have power and be elevated, but like be close to you on your right and left hand. Can we do that? And Jesus, you can just imagine him just maybe being a little disappointed and thinking, man, they're just totally missing the point here. They're totally missing the point. They want to be a part of something, a kingdom of power, and that's not the kingdom that Jesus came to build. He says, you don't know what you're asking for. You don't know what you're asking for. You still don't quite understand what's happening here and what I have to go through. And really, eventually, what you'll go through too. He's telling them in his own way that they will experience, to a degree, what he's going to go through as well. Again, after the resurrection, when they realize who Jesus was, and all of this kind of starts making sense to them, and they turn and they go a different direction, and they are bold to start the church, they become persecuted. They do end up being martyred and dying for it, which just doesn't make sense if it's not real. See, what Jesus is saying, if you're here for power or shows of strength or wealth or authority, you're on the wrong team. Right? That's not what Jesus is all about. Jesus and his kingdom is about pouring out love, understanding that people are more important than things, more important than accomplishments, more important than your authority or the power that you think you have. There's a lot of powerful people in the world, but as you read through Scripture and reread it and meditate on it and how God's moved throughout time and the course of human history and all the kingdoms of the world, no human ruler it can be compared to the authority that God has over everything. So again, as Christians, no matter where we find ourselves in the world, we can have hope and faith because our God is much greater than any human authority. So when we strive for authority and power, God's just like, that's not really what I'm all about here. I have all the authority and power. It's not about showing that off. It's about helping to show how much you love people and to redeem them and to lift people up with the power that you have, not to lord it over them. Jesus is about self-sacrifice and redemption, to put yourself lower than other people and then lift them up. That's what he did for us. When Paul in Philippians 2 talks about humility, he gives Jesus as the great example how the second person of the Trinity takes on humanity to come low so that he can elevate humanity up and so that we can have a relationship with God. That's the point. His example for us is for us not to strive after power and authority, but with whatever power and authority that we do get in this life, to use it to lift other people up and to help those see Jesus. And then it says that the other 10 becoming indignant to James and John. So they're upset. Why are they upset? Because James and John called shotgun, right? How many of you know what shotgun is when you're driving in a car? Do you guys remember doing that when you're little? Or I remember when I started driving, your friends would come to the car, and the first person they called shotgun, they get to drive in the passenger seat, right? My sister would always do that growing up. It was really irritating, right? She would call shotgun, so I'd have to sit in the back all the time. You got to remember to call shotgun, right? That gives you, for some reason, that place of authority. So they're upset, right? Because James and John thought about it first. Like, let's ask Jesus if we can have authority and sit the closest to him, right? So they're all really upset because they asked Jesus and they had boldness to ask him for this place and prominence. And it's just a sign, all of this is a sign that none of them understand yet what's going on. And again, Mark's putting these things together to say, here's the plan that Jesus has. Again, I'm here to die for you. We're going to go to Jerusalem, hand it over, crucified, rise from the dead. And then immediately they're like, hey, Jesus, when you are enthroned and powerful, make us powerful too. Jesus is like, you don't quite understand what's happening here. But they will understand and eventually get there too. And then this last part of our passage today is the plan for his followers. The plan for his followers. This is 35 through 52. 42 through 52. It says, and Jesus called them to him and said to them, you know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. And then they came to Jericho. And as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples, in a great crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he cried out all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he is calling you." And throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. And Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" And the blind man said to him, "Rabbi, let me recover my sight." And Jesus said to him, "Go your way, your faith has made you well." And immediately he recovered his sight and followed him on the way. See what Jesus is doing here. Again, we've got the last account of him trying to explain that they don't know what's happening. They don't quite understand, but they're going to get there. And then we move to this account where Jesus again gives a little lesson about authority and power. And he says, Gentiles, the world loves power, loves to lord it over other people. Right? To be the ones that are in charge, to be the ones making decisions and all these things. And he says, if you want to be a part of my kingdom, then you're a slave to everyone. The lowest in my kingdom are the ones that are elevated. God's kingdom today in the world and eternity is a kingdom that is different than the perspective that the world has. For Jesus, it's not about showing off the authority and power that you have. It's about using it to help others meet, know, and follow Jesus. So Jesus' kingdom is different. He came to serve, and he came to be a ransom, a payment. A ransom is a payment to secure release. Jesus was a payment of himself to himself on our behalf. It was God's payment of himself to himself for us. It wasn't a payment to some other deity or Satan or anything like that. It was we owed a debt to God because of our brokenness and our sin. And so God paid it for us so that we can now come into relationship with him. And this has been the plan all along. Jesus, as he's calling himself a ransom, is actually referencing Isaiah 53. Isaiah 53 is a popular passage, especially when it comes to this week and thinking about Good Friday. This is one of the servant songs in Isaiah. I'm going to read it to you now. This is 53, 1 through 12. This is Isaiah talking about the servant of the Lord. He says, "Who has believed what he has heard from us, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off of the land of the living, stricken for the transgressions of my people? And they made his grave with the wicked and with the rich man in his death, although he had done no violence and there was no deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He has put him to grief when his soul makes an offering for guilt. He shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Out of the anguish of his soul he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the many, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death and was numbered with the transgressors, yet he bore the sin of many and makes intercession for the transgressors." See, this has been the plan the whole time. Even before creation, as God within himself, as three separate persons with one God, talked about creating humanity to join in this eternal relationship. That humanity would fall, that there would be brokenness, and that redemption could only come by God taking on humanity and doing something that humans can't do, so that so that we who believe can have a new life and an eternity in him. This has always been the plan. But the Jews of Jesus' day, they were expecting the servant from Isaiah to come, because other passages talk about the servant being a king, a new king of Jerusalem, a new Jerusalem. And so they were seeing the Messiah to be the servant, the one that's going to come and take over Rome and take over the oppression that they were under as a people and issue a new kingdom then. And that's not what Jesus came to do. Through his death and resurrection, he defeats sin, evil, and death so that we can have new life and eternity. We can be raised from the dead as well. He's doing something much deeper than they were expecting. And they were missing the servant of the Lord passages that talk about him dying and being a sacrifice, paying the ransom for us so that we can have a relationship with Christ. See, all of humanity is exiled from the garden. And it's only through Jesus, who is the way, the truth, and the life, that we can re-enter that presence of God and now have a relationship with him forever. This has always been the plan. This is what he's referring to when he talks about himself being a ransom. And as we even approach Good Friday coming up, this is a great place to spend time meditating on the work that Jesus did on the cross. As you read throughout this week about the triumphal entry, and as you think about him being the servant, and really what the plan of God is for us in life. And that his followers aren't just people who are trying to gain authority and lord it over others like the world is saying you should do, but we're those that through our self-sacrifice, through our love, through lowering ourselves to elevate others, people are drawn in to a kingdom that's different. If we're striving for the same things that everybody else is, and we're doing the same things, what's the difference, right? Why would somebody be like, I want what you want, even though there's no difference between how we live and your perspective on everything. But if how you behave, how you live, how you act, how you lower yourselves to elevate people, instead of thinking that we're always the ones that are the best or in charge, people see something different. They see someone who loves them for who they are and wants them to have a better life. And they're drawn into something different. We need to be different. We need to follow Jesus and be his disciples. And so this passage, again, is fascinating because, again, Mark is stringing together accounts for a reason. He's intentional. It's not just random stories. So after Jesus talks about himself and this idea of authority, and if you're going to follow him and be his disciples, the plan for you, the plan for us, is to be a servant and to, again, lower ourselves to lift other people up. That's what it means to be in his kingdom. We get this little narrative about him healing this blind guy, right? So it moves right from that to this Bartimaeus who's blind and calling for help. And what we're supposed to see here is that this narrative is an example. So Jesus is telling us, the lesson is, okay, we're supposed to lower ourselves to lift others up if you're part of my kingdom. We don't just show power and authority. And then we get this example of this blind guy who literally in the text itself is such an outcast that people are trying to keep him from going to Jesus, right? They're trying to prevent him from going to Jesus. And Jesus says, let him come. Let him come. Because even this blind guy who's an outcast and very low in society has faith. And there's an opportunity for him to come and follow me. And so in his own life, he's giving the example to say, let him come and let me lift him up and let me heal him. And he can go away and have sight again and be free. But what does it say about Bartimaeus? He follows Jesus. He follows Jesus with his sight. Through faith, he sees again. And he says, your faith has saved you. This becomes a picture of us being disciples of Jesus. We're outcasts, right? Humanity is broken. And it's through faith and through our blindness that Jesus restores our sight and gives us real spiritual sight and how to see life differently, how to understand what it means to truly be a follower of him. Sacrifice is the heart of real love. And what Jesus did for us is to sacrifice himself for us. And he calls us as disciples to sacrifice ourselves for others. For us, God says the route to gaining influence is not taking power. Influence gained through power and control doesn't really change society. It doesn't change hearts. He says, I'm calling you to a totally different approach. Be so sacrificially loving that the people around you who don't believe what you believe will soon be unable to imagine the place without you. And that's really our calling today as we, again, prepare our hearts for this Holy Week, as we think about today being Palm Sunday, Good Friday, and going into Easter for next week. As we seek to continue to encounter Jesus in our lives, ask these questions to yourself, and you can even take some notes if you want in your bulletin. But are you asking to be elevated or for opportunities to serve others? What are we asking for every day from God? A lot of times it's about me, right? Me, right? What can you, God, help me? Help me do this, help me do that, help me gain this, all these things. It's not about, God, what can I, give me opportunities to go low so I can lift those up around me, so I can be an example of your kingdom. And then where in your life do you need to work on being a servant? All of us have opportunities, and they're all different. But where can you, and you maybe take a second to write it down, where's an area of your life that you want God to work on? To say, God, in this area, I think I'm pretty awesome, right? And what I need to do is use whatever talent or authority that I have to actually to focus on others and lift them up. How do we do that in life? We are servants of the King. And Jesus, again, in his mission and his purpose and his plan, came to die. It wasn't just this accidental thing or something that happened because, he started poking the bear and they got angry. Like the intent was always for him to be a ransom, to die on our behalf, to rise again and to give us life. So today, again, as we go into this Holy Week, let's think about these things. How can we be lights in the world, to live differently and to do things for others that will draw them into the kingdom? And let me challenge all of us this week as we think about Easter next week. Who will you invite? Who will you invite? The plan is to be outside. Hopefully we'll still pull that off. But who will you invite? Usually people who don't come to church will come on Easter or Christmas. They're called CEOs, right? Christmas and Easter only, right? But most people will come to those dates, right? So you all know people in the park or even outside the park, friends, family. It's an opportunity for them to experience community and to hear about the love of Jesus. So even in that, lower yourselves to the point of saying, I want to be a servant. I want to invite people to experience Easter with us next week. Let me pray. Dear Lord, thank you for the work you did. Thank you for your plan. Your plans are so much greater than our plans. And although we don't always get your plans or understand them, looking back, we can always see how your plans work themselves out. So we're thankful for passages like this that make clear your plan. Your plan was to come to earth, take on humanity, die for us, rise from the dead so that we can live life differently and have eternity in you. So thank you for that. I pray that today, as we think about your triumphal entry, as we move into Holy Week and think about Good Friday and Easter, that you'll move our hearts, that you'll help us encounter you every single day. And in doing that, as we know you more and encounter you more, that we can become more and more servants of others, that we can see and look for opportunities to not lord it over others or show authority, but to give authority, to go low so that we can elevate others up. So be with us this week, Lord, in Jesus' name, amen.